Picture this, you're at a fair in Johannesburg.
Oh, a bustling fair.
Yeah, the sun is shining, it's 1960, there's thousands of people around, a real buzz in the air.
Sounds lovely.
Even the Prime Minister Hendrik Verwoerd is there, about to give a speech.
Wow.
And then suddenly, bang, gunshots.
Oh, no.
Chaos, people scrambling for
That was a
safety.
terrifying scene.
It was an assassination attempt, and that shocking event is where we begin our deep dive today into the life and legacy of Hendrik Verwoerd, the man who really shaped and came to symbolize apartheid in South Africa.
It is a powerful image, and it really captures the volatile atmosphere of South Africa in those days. But to understand Verwoerd's story, we need to go back a bit and look at the broader context.
Okay, so we're talking about South Africa in the mid-20th century, a nation already deeply divided along racial lines.
Exactly. And in 1948, this division becomes even more entrenched when the National Party wins the election led by Daniel Mallen.
And they campaigned on a platform of apartheid, right?
That's right, promising strict racial segregation and ensuring the dominance of the white minority.
This was a real turning point, wasn't it? The moment when apartheid went from a fringe ideology to official state policy.
Absolutely. It was fueled by this potent mix of racial prejudice, economic anxieties, and political opportunism. The National Party very skillfully exploited white fears of a growing black population. They painted this picture of a society under threat.
And they argued that segregation was the only way to protect white culture jobs, even security.
Precisely.
And they didn't just talk, too. They put these ideas into action with a series of laws designed to systematically disenfranchise and segregate black South Africans.
One of the first and most impactful was the Prohibition of Mixed Marriages Act of 1949. It actually criminalized marriage between people of different racial classifications.
Wow.
And then that was followed by the Immorality Amendment Act of 1950, which outlawed sexual relationships between whites and non-whites. These laws were really designed to uphold this idea of white purity and prevent what they saw as the contamination of the white race.
It's just incredible to think about how dehumanizing and intrusive those laws must have been, dictating who people could love and marry based solely on the color of their skin.
It was a brutal assault on basic human dignity. And this was just the beginning. The Group Areas Act of 1950 took segregation to a whole new level. It empowered the government to physically divide cities and towns into separate residential areas for different racial groups.
So it wasn't just about separating people in social spaces, it was about literally redrawing the map of South Africa along racial lines.
Precisely. Imagine being forced from your home, your neighborhood, your community, simply because of the color of your skin. The Group Areas Act resulted in the forced removals of millions of non-white South Africans, displacing them to overcrowded and underdeveloped townships far from economic opportunities and basic services.
A system designed to create and perpetuate inequality, not just separation.
Exactly. And at the heart of the system was Hendrik Verwoerd. He entered the scene in 1950 when he was appointed Minister of Native Affairs. Verwoerd was a true believer in apartheid, a man with a chillingly clear vision of a racially divided South Africa.
And he wasn't content with just maintaining the status quo. He seemed to have a grand scheme, a plan to take apartheid to a whole new level.
He did. Verwoerd saw apartheid as more than just segregation. He envisioned the creation of ethno-states, separate territories for each racial group, each with its own supposed cultural homeland. This, of course, was a complete fallacy, as it ignored the shared history and interconnectedness of South African society.
But this vision of ethnostates, it wasn't just about ideology, was it? It was also about control, about ensuring white minority rule.
Absolutely. Verwoerd understood that true white dominance required not just separation, but also the disenfranchisement of the black majority. He believed that by creating these artificial ethnostates, he could remove black South Africans from the national political equation altogether.
So it was a kind of political chess game, using geography and racial classification to manipulate power dynamics.
Exactly. And one of Verwoerd's key tools in this game was the Population Registration Act of 1950. This law mandated that every citizen of South Africa be racially classified and registered as either white-colored Indian or black.
And these classifications weren't just labels. They had real-life consequences determining where people could live, work, and even who they could associate with.
They did. The Population Registration Act was the bureaucratic backbone of apartheid. It was used to justify every aspect of segregation and discrimination, from housing to education to voting rights. It was a system designed to create and maintain a racial hierarchy with white South Africans at the top.
And Verwoerd was the architect of this system, the driving force behind its implementation. But he wasn't prime minister at this point, was he?
No, he wasn't. He served under both Daniel Mallen and J.G. Strydom, patiently waiting his turn. All the while, he was consolidating his power within the National Party, becoming known for his ruthless efficiency and unwavering commitment to apartheid.
So he was playing the long game, biding his time, until he could fully unleash his vision on South Africa. And that moment came in 1958, didn't it?
It did. Strydom died that year, and Verwoerd was elected leader of the National Party, making him the Prime Minister of South Africa. He now had the power to put his grand scheme into action.
And one of his first moves was to push for South Africa to become a republic completely independent from Britain. He saw this as a way to solidify white rule and escape international pressure over apartheid.
He did, and it was a move that further alienated South Africa from the rest of the world. The 1960 referendum on becoming a republic was narrowly won, revealing deep divisions even within the white community. But Verwoerd was undeterred. He was determined to forge ahead with his vision no matter the cost.
And that brings us back to that fateful day at the fair in 1960, the assassination attempt that could have changed everything.
Yes, that moment when a farmer named David Pratt stepped forward from the crowd and fired 2 shots at Verwoerd, striking him in the head and ear. It was a shocking act of defiance against a man who had become the embodiment of apartheid.
And Verwoerd survived this attack. But what happened next? Did it change him? Did it change the course of apartheid?
That's where things get really interesting. Verwoerd's survival was seen by some as a sign of divine providence, strengthening his resolve to push forward with his racial policies. But it also exposed the growing resistance to apartheid, both within South Africa and internationally.
So did Verwoerd's policies change after the attack? Did the government become more cautious?
Not really. If anything, Verwoerd doubled down on his vision for a racially segregated South Africa. Remember his grand scheme of ethno-states, those separate territories he envisioned for each racial group?
Right.
Well, in 1961, he began to implement this plan, forcibly removing Black South Africans from their homes and relocating them to these designated areas.
It's just hard to fathom the scale of this displacement. Millions of people uprooted from their communities, their lives turned upside down, all in the name of this ideology of racial separation.
It was a truly devastating period. These ethnostates, or Bantustans as they were also known, were often located in remote, barren areas far from economic opportunities. They were designed to be politically and economically dependent on the white minority government.
So it was a way of creating a system of control, not just separation. Almost like the government was trying to create a kind of human chessboard, moving people around to maintain their grip on power.
That's a powerful analogy, and it's not far from the truth. Verwoerd saw these Bantustans as a way to create a system where Black South Africans were permanently disenfranchised, confined to these isolated territories with little or no political power.
But even as Verwoerd was tightening his grip on power, there were cracks appearing in the facade of apartheid. The international community was becoming increasingly critical of South Africa's racial policies, and there was growing resistance within the country as well.
Absolutely. The 1960 Sharpeville massacre, where police opened fire on peaceful protesters, killing 69 people, was a turning point. It sparked international outrage and led to South Africa's expulsion from the Commonwealth.
That's significant. It seems like Verwoerd's vision of a racially segregated South Africa was putting the country on a collision course with the rest of the world.
It was, and the pressure was mounting. Sanctions were imposed. South Africa was becoming increasingly isolated, and the anti-apartheid movement was gaining momentum both internally and internationally.
But within South Africa itself, under Verwoerd's rule, how was dissent handled? We're talking about a time of immense social and political upheaval. How did the government respond to those who spoke out against apartheid?
With brutal repression, Verwoerd's government introduced a series of draconian security laws that gave the police and security forces sweeping powers to detain, torture, and even kill those they deemed a threat to the state.
So it was a state of fear, a climate where speaking out against the government could have dire consequences.
Exactly. People were arrested, imprisoned, and even forced into exile for their opposition to apartheid organizations like the African National Congress, or ANC, which had been at the forefront of the struggle against racial discrimination, were banned, and their leaders were either jailed or forced underground.
It sounds like Verwoerd was determined to crush any form of dissent, to silence those who dared to challenge his vision for South Africa. But as we know, oppression often breeds resistance. Were there any groups or individuals who continued to fight back against apartheid during this period?
There were. Despite the immense risks, many brave South Africans continued to resist apartheid, both through peaceful protests and through armed struggle. Groups like the ANC's Armed Wing, Umkhonto we Sizwe, carried out acts of sabotage against government installations, aiming to disrupt the machinery of apartheid and make the country ungovernable.
So it's a multi-pronged approach. Peaceful protests, international pressure, and armed resistance. It seems like the fight against apartheid was becoming increasingly complex and multifaceted.
It was. And it's important to remember that this was a struggle that took place on many fronts, not just within South Africa itself. The international anti-apartheid movement was growing stronger with boycotts, sanctions, and divestment campaigns, putting pressure on the South African government and its supporters around the world.
And then, in 1966, something happened that would shake the foundations of apartheid and send shockwaves around the world. Hendrik Verwoerd, the architect of this oppressive system, was assassinated.
That's right. On September 6, 1966, a parliamentary messenger named Dimitris Safendas walked up to Verwoerd as he sat at his desk in the House of Assembly and stabbed him to death. It was a shocking act of defiance, a sudden and violent end to a man who had wielded immense power and shaped the course of South African history.
It's hard to overstate the significance of this event. What was the immediate reaction to Verwoerd's assassination, both within South Africa and internationally?
It was a moment of profound shock and disbelief. For many, it felt like the end of an era. But it's important to understand that Verwoerd's death didn't bring about the immediate collapse of apartheid. The system he had built, the laws, the institutions, the deeply ingrained racism, all of that remained firmly in place.
So while Verwoerd's death was a symbolic blow to apartheid, it wasn't the knockout punch that many had hoped for. The struggle was far from over.
Exactly. And in the aftermath of Verwoerd's assassination, the question on everyone's mind was, what happens next? Would his successor continue his hardline policies, or would there be a shift, a softening of the apartheid regime? To understand what unfolded, we need to delve into the complex dynamics of South African politics in the years that followed Verwoerd's death.
And that's where we'll pick up in our next segment. We'll explore the aftermath of Verwoerd's assassination, the continued struggle against apartheid, and the eventual triumph of democracy in South Africa. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been exploring the history of apartheid in South Africa, focusing on the life and legacy of Hendrik Verwoerd. His assassination in 1966 was a major event, but as we've seen, it didn't lead to the immediate end of apartheid. So what happened next in the aftermath of Verwoerd's death?
Well, it's important to remember that Verwoerd was just one part of a much larger system. The National Party remained in control, and the infrastructure of apartheid, the laws, the bureaucracy, the deeply embedded social divisions, all of that stayed in place.
So who took over after Verwoerd?
John Vorster, another hardliner within the National Party, became the new prime minister.
Okay.
He was a staunch defender of apartheid and continued many of Verwoerd's policies, particularly the development of the Bantustans.
Right. Those so-called homelands.
Exactly.
But the world was watching. How did the international community react to Verwoerd's death and the continuation of apartheid?
There was a mix of reactions, shock, condemnation, and a sense of cautious hope. Some thought Verwoerd's death might be a chance for change, a softening of the regime. But that hope faded as Vorster made it clear he intended to maintain white minority rule.
So the pressure from outside continued to build. What specific actions did the international community take to try and force South Africa to dismantle apartheid?
Well, the United Nations had already condemned apartheid as a crime against humanity, and many countries imposed sanctions on South Africa, targeting its economy and trying to isolate it on the world stage. But these measures often had limited impact because some powerful nations continued to support the South African regime for strategic or economic reasons.
It shows that even with widespread condemnation, real change can be slow and difficult, especially when powerful forces are propping up the status quo. So we have this pressure building from the outside. But what about within South Africa itself? How did people respond to Verwoerd's death and the continuation of apartheid?
Black South Africans were living under incredibly oppressive conditions with very limited options for open resistance. But Verwoerd's assassination did energize the anti-apartheid movement. It became a symbol of defiance, showing that even the architect of apartheid was not invincible.
Did this lead to any major uprisings or organized resistance movements?
There were ongoing protests and acts of defiance, but the government security forces were brutal in crushing any organized opposition.
Wow.
A pivotal moment came in 1976 with the Soweto uprising. Thousands of black students took to the streets to protest the government's decree that Afrikaans be used as the language of instruction in schools.
So it wasn't just about language.
No, it was about a deeper struggle for dignity and self-determination. The students saw this language policy as another attempt to erase their culture and identity. The police response was brutal, with hundreds of students killed.
Oh, that's awful.
Mm-hmm.
The Soweto uprising must have shocked the world and brought attention to the brutality of the apartheid regime.
It did. It was a turning point when the world could no longer ignore the human cost of apartheid.
Did it lead to any changes in the South African government's approach?
There were some attempts at reform, but they were mostly superficial, just designed to appease international critics without actually changing the power dynamics. The core of apartheid remained intact.
But the pressure continued to mount both from within in South Africa and from the international community.
Yes, it did. The sanctions were increasingly impacting the South African economy, and the internal resistance was becoming more organized and determined. By the 1980s, it was clear that apartheid was becoming unsustainable.
So how did it finally end? Was it a sudden collapse or a more gradual process?
It was a complex process, a combination of internal and external pressures that eventually led to the dismantling of apartheid. Key figures like Nelson Mandela, who had been imprisoned for his activism against apartheid, played a vital role in guiding the transition to a democratic South Africa.
Mandela's release from prison in 1990 after 27 years must have been an incredible moment.
It was a moment of immense hope and celebration. It signaled a real chance for change and opportunity to finally break free from apartheid.
And Mandela, with his commitment to peace and reconciliation, helped guide South Africa through a peaceful transition to democracy.
He did. In 1994, the country held its first free and fair elections with all citizens, regardless of race, able to vote. The African National Congress, led by Nelson Mandela, won a resounding victory, ushering in a new era of hope and possibility.
It's a remarkable story of resilience and the triumph of the human spirit over oppression. But even though apartheid has officially ended, its legacy continues to shape South Africa, doesn't it?
It does. The effects of apartheid are still visible in the economic inequalities, the social divisions, and the challenges of building a truly just and equitable society. It's a reminder that dismantling a system of oppression is just the first step. The real work lies in healing the wounds of the past, addressing the root causes of injustice, and creating a future where all South Africans have equal opportunities to thrive.
It's a powerful message and a fitting end to our deep dive into the life and legacy of Hendrik Verwoerd and the impact of apartheid. It's a story that reminds us of the fragility of democracy, the dangers of unchecked power, and the importance of fighting for justice and equality. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the spirit of curiosity alive.